Welcome to Formula One Espresso News. Tonight we're going to lead with breaking news. The FIA has just confirmed 2026 regulation changes, and every single stakeholder has agreed with these changes. Also coming up, Toto Wolff's passionate defence of the sport, and of course McLaren's Miami upgrade plans, Aston Martin's deepening crisis, and a very different message from Max Verstappen. So, let's get into it. What have we got for you tonight? So this is the big one, of course. Just over a few hours ago, the FIA have published an official statement confirming changes to the 2026 Formula One regulations. And every single stakeholder has agreed to these regulations. They would, of course, now go forward to the FIA for World Motorsport Council approval, but it should be a formality done via e-vote before Miami. All of the teams, power unit manufacturers, Formula One management, every single one is in agreement. These changes will be effective immediately and will be in Miami on May the 3rd when we go back racing. Now, let me take you through each single one of them on what's changing and what it actually means in plain old English, because all of these press releases are great, but what does it actually mean to us as the fans? First up, we're going to be talking about energy harvesting. The maximum recharge limit in qualifying has now been cut. That's been cut from 8 megajoules all the way down to 7 megajoules per lap. Now that sounds technical, but what it actually means is this. Drivers will be able to spend less time coasting into corners, more time trying to actually run flat out, and less time topping at the battery. So these are some of the complaints we've been hearing about. Some of the issues that people have talked about, saying that actually qualifying doesn't feel like qualifying. We want to see drivers flat out. We don't want to see lifting and coasting. This should make qualifying start to feel like qualifying once again. Next up, super clipping. This has been the other big complaint from Formula One fans. Now, the super clip power limit has gone from 250 kilowatts all the way up to 350 kilowatts. Super clipping is where the engine automatically siphons power on the mid-straight to charge the battery. We see it when they're going down the straight. What happens is the energy runs out and the battery then kicks in, and you see the top speed actually decrease as they're on the straight. That has been a massive complaint for Formula One fans. It creates that really unnatural, inconsistent feeling going through corners, and it's also been one of the things the drivers have been talking about all season, saying that the cars no longer feel like the cars when they're driving, and it's creating a sort of situation where they don't feel completely in control of the cars. So raising that limit, what it means is it will mean less time harvesting, more consistent speed, less driver workloads, and that will be in effect from both qualifying and the racing itself. Third up, the boost mode in races. Now, this is what's going to be known as the Ollie Bearman fix. Now, the boost is now capped at 150 kilowatts. Now, in Japan, Ollie Bearman, as we know, hit the barrier at 50 Gs because that closing speed between all of the cars, between him and Franco Colapinto, was too much. He was coming in, Franco Colapinto was harvesting. The difference was between 50 and 60 kilometers per hour, nearly 500 horsepower difference between the two cars on the same straight at the same point. That is what caused that crash. As we know, Ollie Bearman completely missed Franco Colapinto and hit the barriers. This was the big safety concern that the drivers were on about. Capping the boost limits that. Safer racing, more predictable racing. And here's the trade-off though, and it's worth saying this out loud. Capping the boost could mean reduced overtaking. All of those slingshot overtakes that we've seen all season, some of the things that have actually been quite good, these come from that power difference between the two drivers using that boost mode. If you fix the safety problem, you might well lose some of that action, and that conversation is going to come back. That conversation isn't going to go away at all, because this was actually fundamentally one of the things that Formula One actually got right. Then we come on to race starts. A new low-power detection system. So what this is if a car has low acceleration off the start-finish straight, we call that when it's bogged down. That's the automatic MG UK is now going to kick in and warning lights will flash on the car. This is a kind of incident where you see a car stranded, where we saw, I think it was actually Franco Colapinto back in the opening race of the season in Australia when he had that very near miss. So what's going to happen now, we're going to get a warning to the drivers, and then also there's going to be a flashing lights on the car like those indicators we've seen. But this is the thing we've got an issue with here, because if someone gets an automatic power boost off the line and someone doesn't because they were bogged down, is that a sporting fairness issue? That conversation is going to come, because one of the things we look at Ferrari and their starts, we look at obviously what's happened with, they're so quick off the line, all the Ferrari power units. Now you're getting a system which will automatically kick in and give you a boost to stop a collision. But does that now mean it's unfair? That's probably one of the questions that's worth asking, because ultimately, I think Ferrari are going to be a bit upset about this one if they lose that advantage over the starts. Now, the other thing about that one, which I want to come on to, is the FIA haven't committed to that one fully. What they've said is they want to test it in Miami first, and then they're going to commit to it anyway. So bear in mind that one is still only in the test phases. Next up, we got wet conditions. Warmer intermediate tyre blankets for better initial grip. Pretty self-explanatory. Reduce DRS in the wet for more control. Cleaner rear light systems for visibility. Straightforward safety improvements. No controversy there. It's a straightforward safety design that's basically going to give the tyres more in terms of grip when they come out of the blankets. So what does all of this mean for Miami? Basically, qualifying should be more spectacular. It should be back to what we used to know it as. Back to the old days, I dare say it. Drivers will push harder, less lift and coast, more of what fans actually want to see from a typical shootout on a Saturday. The racing should, in theory, become safer, more consistent, but there will potentially be slightly fewer of those wild overtakes we've been seeing. Those yo-yo overtakes may well disappear. So the sport has made a conscious effort and a conscious choice. It's basically said we're going to go for safety over spectacle. Where the two conflict, that's the exact right call they want to make. And then onto the regulations itself. Now, this isn't a finished picture by any stretch of imagination. We're not going to see massive refinement to the engines. Those are locked in. Fuel flow, all these things that come into play. What we've got now is a situation where the FIA is saying that actually we're going to tweak them now. We're going to see what happens. It's not a rewrite. It's basically the fundamental architect of the cars and the 50-50 power split will actually say exactly the same. Whether or not it's enough, that's what we're going to find out in a couple of weeks' time, to be honest. So, right, that's the lowdown of all of that. That's basically what's happened on this one. I suppose, for me, it's one of these things. Have the FIA done enough? There's a general consensus here. You've got two ways of looking at it. The teams will always try and gather in data to make themselves better. That's fundamentally what happens in Formula One. The politics game will always play this, where teams will use this to leave advantage. They will turn around, they will say, actually, we want this to be a situation where, we want to gain an advantage, but we will cite safety, we will cite all these things, because they know ultimately that's what the FIA will do in terms of safety, and they're in it for themselves. Let's not beat around the bush here. That's what they're actually talking about. But is it enough, or is this just Formula One putting a band-aid on the regulations? I suppose that's what I'm really intrigued to know. It's a lot more than what we expected. It's a lot more than what we thought was going to happen. It's probably a bit more in terms of the details. So some of them are kind of straightforward fixes, like the tyre blankets, the other bits. They're not ones I'd say, are fundamental changes to the run of Formula One. They're just safety things that need hitting in. But I suppose what I'd like to know is, do you personally think that these have done enough? Do you think that actually there's some teams, Ferrari in their starts? Does this actually come in a situation where Ferrari will lose their starts? Is that fair? Behrman's crash has forced that one through. That's a safety measure. I totally agree on that. But then, like I say, I feel we're going to get a trade-off with regards to the overtakes. I don't feel we're going to get as much overtakes, which we're compromising on-track action. Does that feel a right move for Formula One? It's an obvious, safety move. We have to have a safety in place for the drivers. That's fundamentally, number one priority without a shadow of a doubt. But have we got a thing where we're now going to compromise on-track action for this? And was one incident enough to base that off, or is that why the FIA have gone through this? We're gonna trial it first. Generally, what do you think? Drop in the chat whether you think they've done enough on this one, whether or not you think that they've actually not gone far enough, whether or not you think that this is just a band-aid. I'm intrigued to know what people's thoughts are on this one. They've only just landed. Like I said, they only came out about 5 o'clock tonight. They obviously fired the press release out the door as they're walking out the door from that meeting today. The all-in agreement means it's going to go through. They're going to vote via e-vote before, obviously, Miami. So it's all going to go through. That's not going to be a problem. That's just going to be ratified. So there's going to be no issue with that one. The safety ones automatically go through anyway. The FIA don't actually have to ask for that. But they've got complete agreement on all of these changes from, like I said at the start of the show, every single stakeholder involved. So I'm intrigued to know whether or not it's enough, or whether or not this is just them just going, we're just going to do something because the fans have been outraged by what they've seen so far. I'm not entirely convinced. I wanted a bit more in terms of fuel flow. I wanted a bit more in terms of still keeping the on-track action. I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of DRS trains and stuff like that. I know what people are saying about artificial overtakes. I get what people are saying about this. But for me, I also had this big issue with we're now losing on-track action, because ultimately we're saying that we can do this and we can have this into place, but we're going to compromise by having overtakes off the menu. And that for me feels a little bit wrong on that one. Oh, right, that's the first one out of the way. How is everyone? Anyway, welcome to Coffee Corner Espresso News Live. Thank you for those who are here. This is only the second one I'm doing this one live. People who know the channel will know that I've done this for a while now. I've talked about doing this as an interactive thing. I want it to get to a point where people are in the chat. I want it to get to a point where people are actually interacting with this. I feel there's not many news shows out there or many sort of factual news shows that go live with their fan bases and with people who have got very similar ideas and people who want to interact. So for me, it's very much around, can I find a format that allows people to interact in, allows people to talk in? Yes, we've got the obviously option to watch this on replay, but I really want this to be a really two-way interactive thing. So the format I've got in mind is quite simple, where I will bring the story, and that's been fact chat, so that you know it's factual and it's up to date. Those who follow me will know that that's a big thing for me, and I want a situation where people can get the facts, but then also enter into discussion, because I know that when we read a story, sometimes it can be very clickbaity, sometimes it can be sensationalized, and also there can be things like the actual FIA regulations where they're very wordy, they're very technical, and some people just want to know what that means in plain simple terms. You know, how does that happen and what does it mean? So in essence, what we're going to get faster qualifying, less losing the power on the straights. We're going to get better safety features, but in turn, it looks like we're going to get less overtakes. That's probably the best way I can describe what these regulation changes are. Now, will it make a difference? I don't know if it will make a difference to the pecking order, because ultimately, the teams who are at the front, so the Mercedes and Mercedes power units, and obviously everyone's supplied by them and Red Bull powertrains, the engines are good engines. You're not going to lose that overnight, and you're not going to suddenly have a bad car overnight due to these changes. Otherwise, the teams wouldn't agree to all of them. I think there's an element of the FIA realise that this probably isn't going to change the status quo because it's got an equal impact across the grid. So therefore, everybody is being hindered by it in the same sense of it's going to hit every team the same with the battery, with the deployment and all the other bits. So I think there's an element of it's probably going to just make the lap time slightly slower, make the cars slightly slower, which is probably another bugbear of the fans, if I'm honest. One of the things that I know a lot of fans have talked about, these cars are fundamentally slower. They always are in a new set of regulations. We always get the start of the regulations where the cars are a lot slower, they don't quite as fast on track, and then by the end of the regulations, we'll see they catch up. That always happens in the regulation cycle, like what we've gone through. It happened in 2022, and by the end of 2025, we were getting back new and breaking lap records. So I've got no doubt these cars will get faster as the teams develop that understanding as they get more. But I suppose, to me, it's a situation of, I'm not sure they've done enough, but I really want to know what you think about it. And like I said, if you are here, welcome. And if you do get a chance, don't forget, hit that like and subscribe button. I always forget to do that one because you'll be notified when Coffee Corner Motorsport goes live. I'm planning to do this on a weekday, Monday to Friday. Friday's going to have a slightly different time. Monday to Thursday is going to have a 7:30 UK time. And then Friday's going to be a bit later. So the idea of this is I can bring you during the week all the latest from the paddock so that you've got everything. Those who follow me on other socials will know that I do Espresso News anyway. So this is just a case of just bringing something which, like I said earlier, is a bit more interactive. So as I said before, I'm in my mid-40s. I've been a fan for far too many years that I want to count for. All of this is new. I've never used OBS and Stream Decks and all these other bits and all these overlays, so you're going to have to bear with me. At one point, I'm sure I'm going to cut everybody off. At one point, I'm sure that I'm going to cut the chat off, and I'm sure that it's going to go horribly wrong. But if it does happen, bear with me, and I'll get us back as soon as possible. But let's move on, because I've been talking for far too much, which is quite ironic because we're talking Formula One. Now, this was my main story before obviously the FIA took over. So I was going to lead with this story earlier, which was Toto Wolff. Now, what we know is what was agreed, but this happened basically before. So we kind of got to go back in time to get the context of this statement. So before this statement dropped, Toto Wolff set the tone for the whole meeting, but he also set the tone during the press conferences this morning. So this morning, Toto held what he called a media event with the F1 media, and what he talked about in that, he actually spent 7 minutes telling Formula One teams to stop airing their dirty laundry in public. So I suppose, to me, it's one of those where if you've got a situation with the FIA changing things, Toto's basically saying he doesn't want to see a scalpel. He wants to see a scalpel, sorry, not a baseball bat to him. And the thing for me is he's going to say that because he's won every single race so far this season. So he said that discussions between the FIA, Formula One, the teams and the drivers have been very constructive. He wants to see a scalpel, not a baseball bat, done. And he wants everyone to see the same thing, which is better qualifying, better safety, better racing. Ironically, it looks like we got some of those, to be honest. But there was another message that he put underneath this. There was kind of like a warning, I'd say. So he called everyone in the Sport Guardians. Now, he's not the first one to use this. Stefano Domenicalo also used the same language when he's been speaking to motorsport.com last week and some other media outlets. So he said that Formula One had given us all opportunities, and that with that comes responsibility. Now, it's not a throwaway line at all. It's aimed directly at all the public noise we've been hearing about regulations, pushbacks, teams talking, drivers talking, lots and lots and lots of negative press going on in the world about Formula One. And I think Stefano Domenicalo touched on this. What they said was, you got to remember basically that the sport has allowed you to have the opportunities. So maybe we should be respectful of what the rules of the sport are. His message is quite simple: keep it in the room. Now, we now know why they did exactly that, and the teams will look for an advantage. So the teams will always try and gather an advantage through the media. That's what they always do. That's what their sort of their take of everything is. Like I said before on the first part of the show, they will look for any opportunity and they will use the media to push that agenda. Now, they will claim it's under safety. They will claim it's under all of these other factors. But I suppose for me, it's a case of, yes, some of it needs to be in public, some of it does need to be behind closed doors. And have we heard too much negativity around the new regulations? Because, like I say, there has been some good things. We've seen lots of on-track action. We have seen closer following, but we've also seen the yo-yo overtaking and the other frustrations. So I absolutely get what people are coming from. But ultimately, there's also a second part to Toto's story, which is a bit like a warning, which is the ADUO. Now, if you follow me, you wouldn't know I've talked about this. This stands for Additional Development Upgrade Opportunities. So what this is this is a system that's designed to let engine manufacturers catch up during the season. So at the moment, there's a current engine freeze on it. So there's an engine freeze, which means you can only develop reliability fixes. What you can't do is you can't bring in extra stuff to your car until you've hit a criteria of being behind 2% or 4%. Now, Ferrari have been quite open about this. They said that they believe they're down on power. They expect to get an upgrade. They think they're 1 second off. Ironically, it seems that Red Bull powertrains and Ford have got one of the most strongest power units on the grid alongside Mercedes. Some talks they were better than Mercedes. I don't quite agree with that, if I'm honest. But ultimately, it seems that their problems are inherently in the weight and it's in the chassis. So they've got a problem with the weight of their car, not the engine side of it. Ironically, Toto doesn't agree with this either. So what he said was he's going to be surprised and disappointed if the ADUO changes the competitive order. So his view on this is quite simple. When they announced this, this was designed to be teams that are struggling. So this is designed around teams that are basically really struggling to get to grips with new regulations and allow them to catch up. Now, the key word here is catch up, not overtake. That was the mechanism this was put into place for and agreed by all teams. So what they said was, if you're struggling, so like Toto says, Honda are probably the only ones on the grid who genuinely need that support right now. That's what he's saying. He's saying the others don't need it. They can just make tweaks and get better. But he's saying Honda absolutely definitely need the ADUO and need additional development. The others, they can tweak their engines and catch it the normal way. And that's what he's saying. He just wants a situation where with these drivers, what's happened is with these engines, what's happened is we give them additional development opportunities. We freeze, obviously, Mercedes and what will be Red Bull Ford powertrains. And then we get a situation where actually it changes the pecking order and Ferrari ahead of Mercedes. And then next year, Mercedes start going, well, we're a second behind. We want development upgrades as well. That's not what this mechanism was designed to do at all. It was designed as a catch-up mechanism first and foremost. So Toto's positions on this are quite clear. He doesn't want the regulation changes. Bear in mind, he's already had two compromises on these regulations. He's had to compromise on the engine compression row. And he's also had to compromise as well on the actual qualifying trick that Red Bull and Mercedes were doing. So Mercedes are arguing they've already made compromises on stuff they didn't feel they need to, so they don't want it to go any further. And we've probably seen a bit of that in the developments on that one. But then likewise, you don't want to see free performance upgrades just handed out either. So I suppose for me, I agree with what he's saying in terms of, everyone's had the same budget, everyone's had the same development time, everyone's had the same opportunity. We've got an engine cost cap now as well as a normal cost cap. So everyone has had the same opportunity to actually develop their car, develop their regulations, and it's kind of up to the other teams to sort it out. But I suppose the second part is the bit where I kind of struggle where he's coming from, because he's right in what he's saying. It was never designed as a safety mechanism to overtake. But the engine developments were designed definitely in a way that says if a team is behind, they should be able to catch up. And that's what this one's all about. So let me know what you think about that one. Let's just have a look at the chat, actually, because I appreciate some of the comments, actually. So what we got so far. What's the biggest change? What are the new FIA directives? So the new FIA directives, Paul, welcome. So what they are is basically you're going to get more qualifying pace. You're going to get less super clipping on the straight. So you'll be able to go flat out and qualifying more, less super clipping, but the boost mode is going to be capped. So you're probably going to get less of the yo-yo overtaking. Is probably the easiest way, mate, I can describe it, without sort of spouting off kilowatt joules and stuff like that. So qualifying should look more like qualifying, flat out laps. And then what we should have then is we should have a situation then where actually during the race itself, we get an overtake that sticks rather than the yo-yo overtaking we've seen. But that could lead to less overtakes is probably the biggest take from this one. The other one around the start-finish straight, a safety one, so like somebody's put in there. So welcome to the chat. So yeah, the safety response is absolutely fair. I never want to see drivers in any sort of safety issues or any safety risks on that one. So I absolutely agree with that one. The start one is always a concern. It reminds me of years ago where we've seen cars hit when they're stranded on the grid. It is a worry to see that. So at least this new update will do that. It looks like there's like an audible warning as well that the drivers get to just basically kind of tell them that something's happening. And I think that's the idea behind it. They're sort of they'll be told that a car's almost like stalled, and it kind of just, I don't know whether it's every driver or just the ones around them, to be honest. I haven't clarified that one at the moment. So as soon as I get a bit more information, I'll dig into these a bit more. So that's basically what they are, Paul. That's what they are in terms of the safety ones. But we want to see more overtaking, and that, I just can't get past that fact. And the more I sit here and look at it, and the more I think about it, is I think that actually we're compromising here on what could potentially be overtaking action when we might not need to. So I think that's been the biggest one that we got to keep an eye on. Right, let's keep going. What we got? McLaren. So McLaren were at the Nürburgring last week, also ahead of Miami. Both Andrea Seller and Lando Norris had a lot to say when they gave an interview on McLaren's own website about where the team stands after 3 difficult races. So Lando and Oscar took part in the Pirelli tyre test alongside Mercedes. That was last week at the Nürburgring. And like I say, Andrea Seller's given an interview where he talked about GP going, he talked about all these other bits, and then he talked about actually just in general what the first 3 races are talked about in terms of, I've lost my chain of thought there. So he's admitted it's taken longer than expected to understand the power unit. We know they've had reliability issues, both cars failing start in Shanghai, being of course a low point of the season. And of course, they're saying that the design of the MCL 40, which is this year's car, has been affected by their fight for the championship deep into last year. I'm not sure I agree with that one. I think Mercedes didn't bring development last year. I think Red Bull developed deep into it, as we know that Max was catching. I'm not convinced McLaren actually went deep into the season with their updates. They turned theirs off quite early, so I'm calling a bit of cap on that one from Andrea Seller. I'm not entirely convinced that they did a mass amount of development into this year in terms of last year's car, but you kind of got to take it with a pinch of salt because there's no way of proving it. They are due to bring a major aerodynamic upgrade package, which is going to be phased across Miami and Montreal. Every single team on the grid is going to bring an upgrade package. So the one thing I will say is you'll hear a lot in the next week or so about teams bringing upgrades. Every single team coming to Miami will have an upgrade on the car. The difference will be how big is that upgrade package and what does it mean in general. So we can sit here and say McLaren have got a really big upgrade one, but then Mercedes is going to have one as well, and everyone else is going to have one. So I would say just take that with a pinch of salt, because when we get to Miami, you'll suddenly see every team talk about what they've been doing for the past 5 weeks. Because whilst we haven't been racing, what you got to remember is the factories haven't been shut down. So they are still going and they are still actually up there and they're still talking about stuff. So with regards to that, you just got to remember that every team's going to have one. So obviously, world champion Lando Norris was also at Nürburgring. Like I said, he was alongside Piastri and obviously Mercedes drivers. Now, on a Pirelli tyre test, you can't change new stuff. So you can't test new stuff. What you do is you have a set parameter that you test in. Ironically, McLaren actually had loads of problems with Oscar Piastri's car. So they had some really big issues with that one that they meant he had limited running. So that's really interesting that they still are having power unit problems. Ironically, their power unit supplier, which is of course Mercedes, were there with them. So for me, it's kind of like, I don't believe for 1 minute that Mercedes have sabotaged McLaren in any way whatsoever. I saw someone do a post on that one. And what it is fundamentally, if you think back to the past couple of years, so you've got, I'm going to go completely off topic now and talk about McLaren. So what you've got is you've got McLaren now, for the past couple of years, Constructors' Champions. They've been able to get the better Mercedes power unit supply from that car. Now, they use different parts. They don't use all the same parts as what other Mercedes customer teams like Alpine do this year, obviously Williams do, what Aston Martin did last year, but obviously they switched Honda this year. So what you've now got is you've got a situation where with McLaren, they use their own gearbox and their own interface, and they do some own bits themselves. Now, over the past couple of years, that's actually been a benefit for them, as we've seen performances like Mexico, where Mercedes have traditionally struggled. McLaren have actually not been too bad. So we've seen situations where, even though they've had the same Mercedes power unit, they've actually been able to get better performances from that power unit with what they've done with their car. Now we've got a flip side where Mercedes are getting better out of it. They don't want to give that to McLaren. And that's the fundamental argument behind it. They're not doing anything wrong. They're doing everything that's within the regulations. But likewise, they are doing to the letter of the regulations. What they're not doing is they're not going above and beyond. I was talking to someone today, and I compared this to, like, you know, when you get your broadband or something with somebody, or you take out a contract with somebody, the more you have, the more you can get out the people. So if you ring up and you've got a pay-as-you-go contract, what happens is you invariably get not a lot with it. You ring up and they kind of go pay a bit lip service to it. If you've got the all singing, all dancing, you know, everything fibre, paying all bells and whistles in it, what happens then is you tend to get a situation where you'll ring up and you'll get a bit better service. That's what I tend to feel this is with the engines. If you've got all the parts, Mercedes will give you better. And likewise, there's an element of being a competitor as well, because if you're a competitor, I'm not entirely sure that Mercedes is going to be keen to help out a competitor when they're winning, because they want to win. Fundamentally, yes, they supply power units, but they're not in Formula One to supply power units. They're in Formula One to win races, and something they haven't been doing at all. So I think for me, it's one of those where they're not doing anything wrong. McLaren have kind of admitted that, and they've owned it. And I think for me, they're in a situation where they go, this is where we are. We're now understanding it a bit better. We saw from Oscar Piastri, if that safety car hadn't come out, would he have won it? I'm not entirely convinced, but I think it would have made for a much better and a much different race. So for me, there's some things in there which I think that McLaren could be a really dark horse. I think that, yeah, we've got GP come in. Andrea Sella called it the icing on the cake that's already got the right ingredients. He's already rubbished those Ferrari moves. He's already rubbished all that stuff. He said that he's stopping. He said that no matter what happens, he's not leaving McLaren at the moment. He doesn't want to go to Ferrari. He doesn't see it as a deal. GP is there to take workload off him, not to replace him, despite those earlier reports. You kind of got to agree with him at the moment, because I think that Ferrari is a bit of a poison chalice. I think it reminds me of, yeah, if you're from England, you say it's like the England football manager's job, isn't it? Apologies if you're not from England or the UK, but it's basically a job that, unless you win, Ferrari's one of them jobs. If you don't win, you failed. There's no coming second. There's no coming third. It's basically win or bust, isn't it? So they've got everything coming. I think they're a team that could challenge Mercedes. They've got the same power unit. They've got everything in that car that Mercedes potentially have in terms of what the advantages are. I do think that Mercedes have got a better aero package, but then I think that McLaren, with the setup they got with Rob Marshall, Peter Prodromo, and the people they got in place, I think that tier will only get better with GP come in. I think Rob Marshall has been the biggest underrated signing that McLaren have ever made. I think he's a massive loss. I think that Christian Horner was really upset to see him go from Red Bull. I think that for me, he's been probably the unsung hero over the McLaren revival that people haven't really cottoned on to. He was fundamental, years and years at Red Bull, years and years of getting that team up, come to McLaren. And if you look at that first Miami update they did a few years back when obviously Lando won, that for me was really key to it. So it's for me, he's probably one of the biggest appointments we haven't done. I think that obviously they've got Will Courtney has now started from Red Bull. Zach, as I said last week, isn't afraid to go shopping at Red Bull. I think that's a sign of Zach Brown himself. He will do what's best for business. So, yeah, for me, McLaren are definitely a dark horse. I think they will get to grips with the car. They will get to grips with the power unit. They will get stronger. Hopefully, they've done that in these past 5 weeks. Although I must admit that Nürburgring test and those power unit problems do put a bit of a question mark on it for me. They kind of make me think, have they done enough? Or are they in a situation where they've still got the gremlins in there? But only time will tell. But let me know your thoughts on McLaren if you haven't already. Like I say, thank you for those who've already joined in the chat. Really appreciate you being here. Like I say, this is brand new. And don't forget, if you haven't already, hit follow, like, subscribe, all of the usual palaver to be notified when this goes live. Because, yeah, otherwise I'm going to be sat here talking on my own for an hour, aren't I, every night? Right, moving on. Aston Martin. Whew. 0 points, 3 races in. And now we're starting to hear more details on what's actually going on inside Silverstone. So I know if Paul, you're still in the stream. Paul is opposite from the Silverstone factory, so I'm sure he'll tell us what the comings and goings from there, as well as obviously Cadillac, who are based around there as well. But yeah, David Croft has said that the atmosphere inside the team isn't very good. I think we could have all said that, to be honest. Not a happy ship, where his exact words. He's been talking on the Sky Sports F1 podcast. This was obviously a team that was expected to fight for podiums in 2026. Honda Power Unit, Adrian Newey, Fernando Alonso at the twilight of his career. 3 races in, nothing. And let's be honest, just getting a car to the finish line is a challenge and an achievement at the moment. How different are we talking about Aston Martin saying that we're now in a situation where we're actually just glad they're finishing a race? That is not what we expected from an Adrian Newey design car. The one thing I will say for Adrian Newey, he's an absolutely amazing designer, the best designer in Formula One, but he's also not been prone to getting everything right all the time either. We've seen situations where Adrian has been compromised by engine designs and some other bits. So I think it's fair to say that there are some situations where Adrian has taken a bit of time to get used to the regulations and taken a bit of time to understand them. So the last one was what his university project was on, so you'd expect that. So I think this one may just be a bit of that. I think his design's slightly too aggressive. I think that ultimately they've gone too much and not given Honda enough room for the actual power unit in there. When you listen to the vibrations in the car, what they talk about, that to me feels like something's knocking on something. That's what the vibrations causing. So to me, that feels like it's a chassis problem, not an engine problem, because they're not getting it on the workbench. So again, you kind of have to wonder, have they designed something and then Adrian's gone, you haven't got that room anymore, you got this room. So I think that's happened. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. We've talked about Honda. We talked about them to death on the podcast. So for me, we all talked about that this wasn't the same Honda that delivered Red Bull all these championships at all. That got disbanded when they pulled out of Formula One. It got very hastily re-put back together. A lot of people have gone on to do other things within not only Honda, but Red Bull powertrains and other projects themselves. So we all knew that this wasn't the same Honda. So if Aston Martin is saying that they didn't know that, then someone there just didn't do their homework. I've talked about having Andy Cowell sat in the factory. He was the brains behind, obviously, the Mercedes hybrid era. They should have put him into Honda. I don't know why they didn't. Only time will tell why they put him as a team principal, not in charge of the power unit supply. But whatever they did, they made a mistake on it. Kroon Chanrock has been talking about whether or not leadership changes actually fix the problem. This is, of course, the speculation over Jonathan Wheatley. So, as we know, Jonathan Wheatley has left Audi as the team principal. The team said at the time it was due to personal reasons. The general consensus in the paddock is that he's going to go to Aston Martin, but that's not been announced because they're waiting to sort that agreement out. So that's what we're hearing at the moment. What we're hearing is a situation where we don't know if they've managed to actually sort that out, or whether or not there's an actual deal that's been done and it's just kept quiet, or whether or not the deal's waiting to happen. But he's asking whether or not that should be where their priority is on what's happened with their car. We know that Honda are working flat out. We know that Honda have been posting loads of posts about what they're doing behind the scenes to try and get things up. But of course, there's a question over that Adrian knew himself. I remember talking to my dad about this when Adrian knew he was put as a team principal. We were both like, that seems a really strange move, because why would you have your best car designer working as a team principal? It kind of didn't make sense at the time. It doesn't make sense now. It certainly hasn't made sense since. We saw those cryptic statements out from Lawrence Stroll about the way Aston Martin run and what the actual structure is. And I still don't know what their structure is, if I'm honest. They seem to... I keep comparing them to Real Madrid. I keep comparing them to a team full of like Galacticos, and I keep comparing them to a team which got a great bit of individuals, but not a team. And I think that's where we are with Aston Martin. On paper, all of the ingredients, but the reality is they're a million miles away from a car. And I suppose the question for me now is, what happens with this gap now? We've obviously got Lance is off doing GT racing. Is this a sideways move for Lance? Is this what's happening with Lance? So are we in a situation now where Lance Armstrong is starting to move away from Formula One, and this is Aston Martin's way of phasing him out in terms of his exit? We know he's been under pressure. We know there's a lot of criticism over obviously having Lance in the car, rightly or wrongly. Everyone's got a view on that one, but ultimately, is this the start of them phasing him out into that? Fernando Alonso, obviously now a dad, so many congratulations to him. Is this the start of the end of his career? We know that he hasn't got that much longer, although the rookie himself will tell you he's going to go on forever. But I suppose for me, with Fernando, at what point does he say, I haven't got a car? So Fernando needs a car that's going to perform in the next year or two. He can't wait, 3-4 years down the line. He hasn't got that time limit. Aston Martin need to make some improvements to attract some talent, because if Fernando and Lance do happen to make way, at the moment, who comes in? You've got to be sure that you've got some good stuff happening. Now, the only way they do that is to improve their performance and to basically get to a point where can they recover at all this season. So please let me know what you think in the chat. Do you feel that Aston Martin can improve? Do you feel that just finishing a race is where they got to be? And is this a situation where it'll get better as the season goes and we're expecting Aston Martin to start finishing races and move up? Or, yeah, like you say, maybe Aston Martin should give up on the current rate and focus on 2028 onwards. But it's a genuine question. At what point do you give up on this year's car? Because the one thing we will say is you've got regulations that are going to be the same next season. So it's not too bad in the current regulations because you've got another couple of years. So any development you do now is handy for next year. Now, what you can do is develop and hold back. So you can have a testing season, going back to that point there. You can have a situation where you go, actually, we're going to do a lot of tests this year. So we're going to write off this year because, you know what, the car's an absolute bag of crap. And at what point do we go, we need to sort this out and we need to move it, and we're going to let Honda do their bit, but what we're going to do in the background is we're going to do some tests on the car ready for next year. So maybe that's what Adrian's doing. Maybe he has almost given up on this year's car, knowing that it's better to get it right when the engine's right, because why show your hand now as well? Because whatever you put on the car, people can see as well. So going back to that point, really good point about waiting for 2028. Maybe not 2028, but there is a chain of thought that says maybe hold back some of the stuff you've got if it's a game changer because your car's rubbish. Because the moment you put it on the car, you open it up to spy photography, people understanding what's going on, people seeing what's happening with it. So I do actually think there is a chain of thought that says maybe giving up on this year isn't a bad thing, knowing that you've got the AZUO to come, you've got all the bits to come on the engine side of it as well. Do you run some tests on some parts? Or do you just bring some upgrades where you're just looking for performance, wind tunnel correlation, all those bits where actually you can do that so that when it comes to the end part, you go, this is what we've got on that. That's probably one where we need to look at it in terms of what that means. But for me, I think Aston Martin, they're not going to be able to do a lot this season. I'm not entirely convinced they can, but it remains to be seen, doesn't it? And last up, Max Verstappen. This was quite an interesting one. So a few weeks ago, Max was obviously talking about walk away from Formula One. I remember doing a video on this one at the time and on the podcast where Jos Verstappen said something very different. So Jos said that actually he didn't think that Max would walk away. And at the time, it kind of went under the radar, but Max is kind of changing his tone a bit. Now, he's obviously been GT racing at the weekend. He was speaking at a Viaplay event, and he said that he's going to be retiring in a few years' time. Now, what I can't get from that interview is, did he mean retiring from motorsport in general, or did he mean Formula One? It doesn't feel like he meant motorsport in general. It kind of felt like he meant from Formula One. Now, Max, as we know, has got a contract to 2028. We know that contract's been kicking in. We know he's got issues with the regulations. He's called them fundamentally wrong, not just needing tweaks. He said that they need all of them changed. You know, closing speeds, energy management. He's even talked about V10 engines. Interestingly, he's got a couple of those today. The FIA have given him closing speeds. They have given him energy management. So it'd be interesting to see what Max now thinks of the regulations, bearing in mind that, you know, he was using Mario Kart reference, and we're now in a situation where this should, in theory, help a team like Red Bull out. Now, that turnaround walkaway scene has been shifted. He said he welcomed the discussions that happened today, said it was a step forward, said he was sceptical of them, but also said he was engaged with it. So now, obviously, like I said, the FIA made those changes. Whether or not Max stays, I keep thinking that Max has got a big move in him still. I feel that Max has got one more sort of move, probably to Mercedes. I don't think a move to McLaren's on the card. I talked about this on last week's show. I think if Max is going to go anywhere in Formula One, he goes to Mercedes. I think there might have been outside chance going to Aston Martin before, when you had the likes of obviously Adrian go in and it looked like Jonathan Wheatley was going. I think with the current performance, Max isn't going to swap Red Bull for the Honda and the Aston Martin one at all. I feel that's kind of off the market. I don't feel a team like Ferrari will go for him. I don't think they want to upset the apple cart. I think that Ollie Behrman is a shoe-in for when Lewis Hamilton goes. I think they desperately want to keep Charles Leclerc, so I think they will work around that one. I think that I can see Austria going to Red Bull to replace Max, but I don't see it going the other way. I can also see George potentially going there if it gets where he's left without a seat, because ultimately George will then be looking at likes of Aston Martin, which wouldn't suit to where he is in his current performance level. So I do think there's a merry-go-round which hinders on what Max Verstappen's doing. And I think that we will still see a big money move. I mean, I know Max isn't motivated by money, and I don't think for 1 minute that Max is doing this to get a better contract. But I'm also a great realist that if someone's going to offer you the sort of money that we're hearing that Mercedes is going to offer, as well as the ambassador role, as well as actually what that means going forward for Max in terms of a competitive car, I think he would genuinely look at taking that offer because he wants to win races and he wants to cement his legacy. Now, like I said, I don't think that he's hell-bent on doing that in Formula One. He's proven that he's enjoying other motorsports. He's enjoying his team Verstappen.com. He's enjoying all the other stuff that he does. And I think for him, as long as the team lets him do those bits, like obviously Red Bull have been doing, he's happy to do that. The key to that is obviously Red Bull do let him do that. So for me, does that keep him there? If they can get the weight off that car, if they can make themselves competitive, if they can get to a situation where actually by the middle of the season they're coming back into play because they made those gains. We've talked about, literally just earlier that their power unit doesn't seem to be the problem at all. So it seems to be a thing where it's more of an issue with the actual chassis side and the weight on it. So if they can sort that bit out, they're going to be fine with that one. So I think that there is a big money move in Max if the situation rises. I still think, like I said many times, Toto, he didn't tie his drivers down to long-term contracts. I think that's done for a reason. So I think for me, he's paying the market. And I do feel that if Max Verstappen comes on the market and you're a top team, you will automatically explore the option, even if it's not immediately going to take him. That then begs the question to what do you do? You've got Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon. You got drivers down lower end of the grid. Gabriel Bortoleto has done well for Audi since he's been there. What do you do with those drivers in terms of making the step up and who replaces Max or even like a Fernando or those bits? So we got 14 drivers out of contract. I'll do a podcast or a video soon on silly season because we have got a huge amount of drivers. And I do feel that someone like Max is a domino effect. A bit like we saw with Lewis a couple of years back. I think once Max decides what he's doing, that will then sort of let the rest of the grid play out and let the rest of the grid go on for that one. But that's all I got for tonight. I mean, that's been almost an hour, so appreciate people who have dropped in. Appreciate you being here. Genuinely, it means a lot. Like I said, this is all new to me. That's everything I've got. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit follow. You'll be kept up to date. If you're not following, Coffee Corner Motorsport is where I am on all of the social medias. And, of course, the website is www.coffeecornermotorsport.com. That's got articles up. That also covers IndyCar, F2, F1 Academy, Formula E as well. So not just Formula One. So if you are a motorsport fan, please feel free to head on over there. But, yeah, tonight, the FIA have confirmed that real changes are coming. And Miami just got a whole lot interesting. I'm Terry Widows. This is Coffee Corner Motorsport. You've been watching Formula One Espresso News. I'll be back tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. I'll catch you then. Thanks for watching.